And more than 50 million people around the world are believed to be internally displaced. These are people who are forced from their homes by conflict and disaster. It's the highest number ever, according to the Norwegian Refugee Council's Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre. Now, factor in the coronavirus and those refugees are clearly even more vulnerable. Joining me now is the Centre's Director, Alexandra Billak. Alexandra, thanks for your time. The combination of this pandemic with a record number of displaced people makes for a rather frightening situation, doesn't it?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Indeed, the findings of this year's report are particularly sobering. As you said, we're reporting a global crisis of internal displacement that has reached unprecedented levels, with over 50 million people displaced as a result of conflict and disasters over 100 countries in the world, many of which are fragile countries, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And we're very concerned that these 50 million people are now also facing an unprecedented threat caused by the global COVID pandemic. These are very vulnerable people who are living in conditions where the spread of the virus could be particularly rapid and could have far-reaching consequences.
What does the aid scenario look like, particularly in those poorer countries, say, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, it's true that even at the best of times, many millions of IDPs across the world struggle to have access to even basic social services. Many of them are in camp situations or living in informal settlements or in urban areas with very little access to government assistance, and in some cases even to the aid that can be provided by international humanitarian agencies. Now, right now, with many of the restrictions linked to the COVID pandemic, this means that much of this assistance, or some of this assistance at least, has been suspended or is being delayed. So we're concerned that the vulnerabilities that many of these IDPs face, whether it comes to accessing food, shelter, education, and of course healthcare, is going to be compromised, and that we're going to see a spike or an exacerbation of these vulnerabilities in the coming months.
So how do you get governments who are not only dealing with a health crisis, but now possibly the worst recession seen in decades, to focus on ensuring that aid reaches these communities?
Well, indeed, that is a huge concern. We were seeing, actually, our report has documented some very positive progress demonstrated by a number of countries across the world over the last few years in acknowledging the scale of the issue of internal displacement in their countries and putting in place measures that can help both prevent it from happening in the first place, but also find solutions. Now, with the risk of a global recession and with the risk, of course, of humanitarian and development budgets being cut, we're particularly concerned that governments could turn inwards and that much of these efforts are at risk of being slowed down or even hampered. Now, there are a number of things that can be done, and I think governments need to be aware of balancing out, of course, their obligations to curb the spread of the virus in the restrictions that they're putting forward, but also their responsibility towards their citizens in ensuring that their vulnerabilities don't spiral into a new crisis in the future.
Alexandra Billak, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.